Have you ever wondered how educators and community members can support immigrant families, undocumented youth, and individuals with DACA? That's exactly what this podcast is going to explore. Join us to learn more about these topics, listen to our guest stories, and explore resources to support students and their family. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla. I immigrated to the United States at a young age and am currently working as an associate professor of education. This is the Educators and Immigration Podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Educators and Immigration. I'm very excited to be here with Marco Bravo today. I got the opportunity to meet Marco at Edgewood College in Madison, Wisconsin, where he studied and where I'm currently an associate professor of education. Marco graduated from a Madison High School in 2010 and then graduated from Edgewood College in 2015. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts Degree in Spanish. Marco also received his English and Spanish language interpreting certification from Madison College. In Wisconsin and in Mexico, Marco has had many different employment opportunities. Marco, it's great to see you again and to be here and to have you as a guest on our podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Lalo, thank you for the invitation, and it's good seeing you again.
Yes, so I got the opportunity to meet Marco again with the MISOL program last winter, and we have the next cohort in Mexico during this time that we're doing the recording. And so I wanted to connect with Marcos to kind of talk about his story and asking him to be on the podcast. Can we begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your own story, whatever you feel comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally, as you mentioned, from Mexico. I'm from the state of Mexico and a town called Tlalnepantla, which is close to the city. However, at 9 years old, from what I can remember, around 8, 9 years old, my mom decided to take me and my sister to the U.S. She felt that at the time, she was a single mother. And so she felt that it would be best for us to travel with her. And since my aunt was already living in the U.S., my aunt asked my mom, to go over to the U.S., which my mom did. So my mom traveled to the U.S., and about 1 to 2 years after she was there, she sent for myself and for my sister. And so we left Mexico, and then we just stayed over there. I remember I got there when I was in second grade, and I was there second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. I then went to middle school, 6th and 7th grade. And right before 7th grade ended, we ended up coming back to Mexico. So my grandma at the time got sick, and my mom wanted to be with my grandma, who was sick at the time. And so we traveled back home, and I studied my last year of middle school here in Mexico. I graduated from middle school in Mexico. And I think altogether I was here about a year or so. And then later, what happened was that I didn't take the exam to go into high school because at the time I was not so motivated to continue studying. It was not something that I was looking forward to. And so I didn't do the exam. And so what happened was I was just working. And I guess my aunt, who was still in Madison, she saw that I wasn't really doing anything with my life, and she asked if I wanted to go back to the U.S., which I said, yes, of course. And then so a second time, I packed up my things. I said bye to my family, and myself and my sister, we ended up going back to Madison. We entered the border illegally. We crossed the desert. It took us about a week to get back to Madison, and we made it. We made it back to Madison, and then so I started high school in Madison. I finished my education in La Follette High School. And in high school, I got the opportunity to, actually was awarded for a scholarship for being involved in the community, which is called the Community Scholars Award. And so I started going to school in Edgewood. I was originally going for nursing, but that didn't go the way I planned it. And so I ended up graduating with what I could, and which was a degree in Spanish. And so that's a little overview of, my history in the U.S. and also my history in Mexico. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for sharing that information about it. As you were sharing your story, it parallels
a lot of my story as well. I was about 7 years old when I ended up leaving to the US as well with my mom and my brothers. So it was, as I heard you share that part of your story, it really resonated. The other thing that you mentioned was the difference in educational system between the US and Mexico. In Mexico, you have to take tests to move on from one stage to the next.
Yes.
You don't automatically go. And even the university, there's a test for it.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit more about like how that works?
You know, it's funny because, well, right now, my little brother, who is also here in this room, he's actually going through that process himself. And what I'm seeing now makes more sense than what I was living through at the time when I was about his age as well. So what happens is that after you graduate middle school, you have to take a test, and depending on your score, it will determine which school you end up in. But that also will determine, I guess, if you get like higher scores, you get to enter schools that are more, how can I say, like that have more prestige and that are focused in areas such as the sciences or medicine and things like that. Versus if you don't make it to a higher score, then you get with like a lower grade school. And so, of course, it's your goal to try and get the highest score as possible. And so right now, my little brother, he actually just started school this past Wednesday or so, and he was able to pass the exam. I think what you do is you select up to 10 schools, and depending on the score that you get, then you get the school that matches to the score that you got. And so he got, I think it was like it wasn't his first or second choice, but he still, he tried, and I think he ended up with his fourth choice of school. And so, that's very different than, back in the US where you just graduate middle school, then you go to high school and so on. And so at the time, I was not aware of that. Neither was my mom, and neither was any of my close family members. And so that whole transition was so, how can I say, like, so, ¿cómo se dice? Era algo que no veía, ¿no? Something that I was not familiar with. And so it was just so strange. But now that time has passed, I can understand a little bit better.
One, like you mentioned, is knowing how the systems work, both in the US and in Mexico, to understand what you need to do to prepare yourself for it, to then know what the opportunities will be, because ultimately that the same process is going to happen for the university as well. And the university, from what we heard at La UNAM, was that it's not as expensive to go to university here, but you need to have the scores to be able to get accepted, and that determines your opportunities as well.
Exactly, yeah. And also something that you just mentioned, different systems in different countries. When I returned from the US and when I started middle school, or when I was about to end middle school here, I was not aware of this system. And so when it was time to take an exam, I had no idea that even needed to be done. And so I think that's what also blocked me from enrolling in that exam. And it's something strange because I had never really dived into why I hadn't taken the exam, but now I understand this a little bit better. I was just not aware that such system existed.
And you were talking about the transnational educational experience too, of doing some schooling here, doing some schooling in the US, and then thinking about how do you reconcile the two educational systems to make sense of them.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because I feel like as we've had other conversations with other people about what does it look like to then go to school in the US versus going to school in Mexico. So one of the other things that we kind of met each other at Edgewood, as you mentioned, you were a community scholar, and we had the opportunity to work closely there. And then you were able to get your bachelor's degree. And at some point you decided to move back to Mexico. Can you share about that process of coming back to Mexico? What that decision was like? I'm assuming it was a really hard decision, but what was all involved in that decision for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a very, very big decision for me. As I had mentioned, I had just graduated from Edgewood. I was working. I was earning, good money, fairly good money, and I was living okay. But if you recall, my mom stayed back home. It was just my sister and I that decided to come back to the US, or that had the opportunity to come back. And so I came back to the US in 2007, and I graduated around 2015. So I think it was about 8 years that had gone by since I hadn't seen my mom, or my sister had also returned to Mexico a few years prior. And so at this point, it was actually just me living in the US with my aunt, the person that gave me the opportunity to go back. And I was with some cousins and my uncle, but everyone was really doing their own thing. I was kind of just set aside from them. And so just doing things on my own. And what happened was that I hadn't submitted my DACA application right when DACA was introduced, because I actually had a lot of tickets that I had obtained for driving without a license, for driving without insurance, for possessing a car without any of the above. And so I had a lot of tickets, and a lawyer that I had talked to had said, hey, before you apply for DACA, you need to pay off all of those debts or all of those tickets, because otherwise they're going to decline your application. So from the time that DACA was introduced, it actually took me about another 2 or 3 years to be able to pay off all of those tickets, because it was a lot. It was in the thousands, like $2,000, $3,000 that I had obtained for driving without a license many, many times. And of course, I couldn't get my license because I was undocumented. And so I finally was able to pay off these tickets, these tickets that I had obtained. And so I finally submitted my DACA application. I submitted my DACA application around February of 2016. However, by February of the next year, I had still not received an answer. And so I was growing a little bit desperate that I wasn't receiving a response from immigration. And so I was growing impatiently. Once again, I was on my own. I really didn't have anyone to communicate what I was going through. And so I just kind of felt alone at the time. Around this same time, my employer at the time had sent me a letter indicating that there was a problem with my social security number and that I needed to submit another copy, one that could confirm my identity. And within 2 weeks of that, I actually quit. I quit because I knew I wasn't going to be able to provide my employer with a valid social security number, because one didn't exist. And so rather than putting myself through that process, I just quit. And after that, I got a little bit of money from quitting. And so I just kind of stayed at home, did a lot of reflection, analyzed what I was going under. And by April of 2016, I started thinking that perhaps I wasn't where I needed to be. And so one day I was talking to one of my colleagues from a previous employer who had said that you can go ahead and take out money from your retirement plan that's set up with the state. And at that time, I was not aware of that. And so I decided to just kind of peek around and see how much money I had saved up over the years that I had been working. And I think it was close to $12,000, $13,000. And so I submit my application. I withdrew the money. It was deposited into my account. And then at that point, the idea, all these things are happening at the same time. I'm feeling like I don't belong there. I'm feeling like perhaps I need to be somewhere else. I don't have a stable job. I don't have things were just not stable. My emotions were not stable at the time. And I got this money sitting around. And so I started thinking, well, why don't you just go back home? You promised your mom that you would return and that you would be with them. So maybe it's more important to be with your mom, with your family, with your siblings, etc. Because sure, I'm making some money here and I'm living a great life, but am I really content? And so I wasn't. And so I was like, well, maybe I should go back home. And so what I did is I paid off some things that I owed. I paid off my the remaining amount so that I could get my degree, like the actual physical copy of the diploma. I paid that. I paid a few other things. And with the remaining money, I was like, you know what, let's go back home. And so that part started taking place. I purchased the plane ticket probably towards the end of that month. But later, I actually spoke with my close friends in Madison and they were like, no, dude, you should wait. You should just stick around because maybe that DACA will come anytime soon. And I had a doubt, right, at that moment after talking to them. And what I did is that I had already purchased the plane ticket, but after talking with them, I canceled the plane ticket. And I was like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I should stay here. And so I canceled the plane ticket, but I had already talked to my mom at that point, and I had already kind of told her what I was going through, and she had supported me. She had said, come back home. We're waiting for you, and we're happy that you're thinking of coming back. And so that also kicked in, and I started just kind of thinking, well, what do I do? Should I stay or should I go back home? And later that week, I was like, well, maybe I should actually go back home because that's more important for me than DACA. Because if I get DACA, I still won't be able to be with my mom or with my siblings. And if I do go back to Mexico, it will be for a temporary time. And that's not what I want. I want to be with my family and not let DACA determine how long I'll be with them for. I want to make that decision. And so once again, I purchased another plane ticket and I went full and forward with that decision. I remember I was really, really scared with just the thought of buying the ticket, showing up at the gates where you board the plane. And I fear that perhaps immigration would say, hold on, you're not going anywhere. You entered illegally, and so you cannot go back to your country. That was a fear that I had. And of course, as I mentioned, I was going through all these things alone, and I didn't have anyone really that I could share these fears with. But it didn't matter. I was like, you know what? Well, whatever, I'm going to go through with my decision, and nothing's going to stop me. And so, yeah, I boarded the plane. Before that, of course, I sold a few things that I had. Some I just gave to charity. I donated things. And I just packed one big suitcase with just the essentials. And then I just left, got home. And it was a big decision, but it was a decision that has brought to me a lot of joy, a lot of happiness. When I first landed the plane, got off the plane, and I saw my mom waiting for me on the other side of the door, like once the door opened, and I saw my mom there. I remember she cried, I cried, and it was such an emotional moment, right? Because, of course, I hadn't seen my mom in about 10 years. And I didn't also know if I was going to be able to see my mom again while being in the U.S. because, of course, I didn't know if I wanted to return to Mexico or if I wanted to continue my life in the U.S. It was just, that. And so thank God that everything went correctly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. As I was listening to your story, the sense of like que como que algo falta, like that something's missing, that unknown, that always waiting, and the fear were all three of the things that kind of come up in terms of thinking about how it feels to constantly live being undocumented in the U.S.
Exactly. Confusion, a lot of confusion, because, I didn't know what to do right after I lost my job, right? Because the employer checked the social, and being by myself, living by myself, having to look after myself, I didn't know what to do. And I also didn't know, should I continue working? Should I not?
And not having not an open conversation. I think since DACA, there's been a lot more conversations about what does it mean to be undocumented, what are some pathways. But I feel like growing up, there wasn't as many conversations or support groups or people who you could reach out to find out more information. Tampoco.
Exactly. And this is something sad that happened to me. But when I was also going through that process of figuring out if I was going to come back or not or stay over there, I was so desperate to find someone that I could talk to and that could give me a valid answer, or not a valid answer, but just their point of view, that I sought a homeless man to help me out. I remember one day I was just walking down State Street and there was this homeless person, this African-American homeless person that was just kind of in a bench. And he seemed like he was kind of drunk, right? But he seemed friendly and I needed someone to talk to. And so I started telling him about my situation and about what I was going through. And I was like, what do you think? Should I stay or should I go? And I think if I remember correctly, he encouraged me. He was like, go home. But as you can see, it got to the point where I asked a homeless person about this, where if we had a better support system or a better community, I think that this could have, happened differently.
And have more open conversations about different pathways.
Exactly.
Or different opportunities as well. And I feel like that's definitely something that we continue needing. As DACA conversations are happening, I feel like we need those for all of our communities.
Exactly. And of course, I did get the feedback of my friends, of my close friends, which is great. I had that support system, but my friends were actually, I don't want to say discouraging me, but they wanted me to stay. And what I think I really wanted was someone to kind of give me feedback with a neutral point of view, because of course your friends, they love you, and so they want you to stay with them. But it's different when it's like a stranger, like a more professional point of view, right?
Yeah, and you get the pros and the cons of
Exactly.
staying, pros and cons of going. And then the other thing that you had mentioned was about driver's license in Wisconsin. In 2007 is when the Real ID got started. So prior to 2007, people could get their driver's license in Wisconsin. But since then, that kind of prevented people from it. And I also wanted to just mention, like how you mentioned the compile effect, that I can't get my driver's license, so now I'm getting a ticket. If I don't pay the ticket, it doubles, and then it just continues snowballing.
Exactly.
And sometimes you feel like you're like, I'm trying.
I was trying, but I was also like just trapped, right? Because what else could I do? I mean, there was no one to have these conversations with and say, well, here's what you could do. Because these conversations to people that are in positions of power, it's kind of hard to have these conversations with them. And so I avoided these conversations with people that could perhaps have helped me, because I just felt like these conversations were so far away from them that they could not understand what I was going through.
Yeah. And all the different emotions, all the different feelings, all of the different unknowns too. And so at that point, then you take the decision to come back to Mexico. You've been here for a couple of years now. One of the things that you started here was a coffee shop, Café Jaguar. Can you talk to us about that coffee shop?
Yeah, absolutely. I will love to share about that, but also just want to finish the story about DACA, because it didn't end there, right? So what happened afterwards is that I think it was so I got here, I think in April 2017. And I think towards the end of May, I get a message from one of my close friends who says, hey, your DACA application was approved and I actually have your work permit here with me. And so that was a big announcement, a big update. Of course, at that point, I was questioning, well, did I make a mistake? I should have just stayed a little bit longer. I should have just had more patience. And so what I did is I started calling the offices of immigration. What was the name you said?
USCIS.
Exactly. I started contacting them daily, just trying to see if there was a way that they could pardon my exit of the country in that way and see if I could go back to the US. But no matter who I talked to, they all said, no, unfortunately, you lost that benefit the moment that you walked out. And there's nothing that you can do about it. And so at that point, I think it was about a month after I continued to try, I just kind of gave up and I was like, well, I'll just stay in Mexico. And, it's not so bad. I like being with my family. I have that. And I just started looking at the pros of being in the country and not focusing on what I had lost, but on what I had gained. And then so from there, that transitioned to me getting employment in Mexico. I had to go through about 2 or 3 employers before I could actually find an employer where I felt that I was kind of cared for, because the first 2 employers, I just felt like they really didn't care. I was just another number. And so I started working for a bank and I was good there. I started working there as a customer service representative with Canadian customers. And so all of the conversations were, of course, in English. I was in a call center and these clients were in Canada, of course. And my job was just to communicate with them in English, help them out with their finances, things like that. And so it was okay. And that job actually led to the coffee shop, because I remember that when I got here to Mexico, I had some ideas about some businesses that I wanted to start. And one of those ideas was a coffee shop, because I was passionate about coffee, coffee, the beverage that we all drink. I was passionate about that. I was passionate about food. I had worked in a few restaurants, and even though it was hard work, I actually learned a lot from those restaurants, and I learned how to prepare meals, how to cook, etc. And I had a love for food as well. And so I had the idea to start a coffee shop, and that job at the time, I think they were offering like a loan, right? Like a personal loan. And so I was like, well, maybe I should take advantage of this loan and with it start my business. And so with the help of a partner, we decided to do this coffee shop business, which we opened up. We named it Café Jaguar, just because of the representation of jaguars in our culture, in our history, with the Aztecs, the Mayans. And so we named it Café Jaguar. It was actually doing pretty good for about, I would say for like the first 6 months after we opened. We were doing pretty good. I was still working at the bank, but also managing this business outside of my work hours. But then COVID hit. And so when COVID hit, the Mexican government, they launched a control plan for restaurants and I think for just a lot of organizations. But one of those areas that was hit really hard was the restaurant business. And so what they did at the time was to close down the restaurants. They imposed these restrictions where you could only open like for a few hours, where everything had to be delivery or you couldn't eat inside, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was imposed. And so the business just went down afterwards. I don't think we were the only business that was affected. I think there were hundreds of thousands of businesses that were affected worldwide. But given that we were a new business, we were hit really hard. And so bills started to pile up. We weren't making enough money to support, the bills, the rent, the food, everything that goes along with launching a coffee shop. And so my business partner and I figured that it would probably be best to close down the shop. And so we did. We ended up closing the shop. It was a hard decision for everyone because we were so, how can you say it? Well, like a business is kind of like having a little child or like a puppy, right? You get attached to it. And so it was hard, but we did that. At the end of the day, I remained with the coffee shop business online, not coffee shop business, but more of selling coffee. I get coffee from different parts of Mexico, like Puebla, Oaxaca, Veracruz, different parts of the country. In some cases, I actually have traveled to the plantations. I have established relationships with the cultivators, and I have actually, roasted the coffee myself, and then I bring it back to where I live, and I just kind of package it up and I sell it online or to close friends or relatives, etc. And so I still continue to do that as a hobby, and perhaps in the future that might evolve to another attempt at another coffee shop business, because I think when you have the passion for food and for coffee and for serving others, those things combine and it turns into a business proposition for that.
And like you mentioned, is your interest, something you enjoy doing. And it's also, if you can make money from that too, it's even better.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, COVID did affect everybody. And we thought it was going to be here for a little bit. And then a couple of years later, everybody's getting impacted. COVID ended up impacting everyone. And as you mentioned, even in the US, many restaurants ended up closing.
Exactly.
People who worked in the restaurants ended up not working.
Exactly.
There was some stimulus money, but undocumented people didn't qualify for that in the US. And then 3 years later, we're still in a COVID era, but the restrictions are not as tight as they were when they first started.
Yeah, and like you said, at the time, there was no support for businesses here in Mexico that were undergoing that situation. And so the only thing you could really do at that time was get more loans. But of course, that wasn't going to be helpful because, you were just going to pile on more debt.
And we didn't know how long COVID was going to happen.
Exactly.
Either. At first, people thought it was just going to be a few weeks. And then 3 years later, we're still here. One of the things that has come up in your story, as you've kind of been telling it, has been the importance of family and familismo. Would you feel comfortable sharing more about your family here in Mexico?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at the moment, I think I'm pretty happy with that aspect of my life, my family, because family, of course, is very important everywhere. But I think that, Mexicans, we're very close to our family. Like if we think about holidays, like for example, Christmas or New Year's or a birthday or
Sundays.
Exactly. If you think about that, like there's big things happening during those holidays, and usually it's always when you're with your family. So in that part, I feel really happy. You know, my family members that I hadn't seen in such a long time, I was able to spend a Christmas with them, celebrate New Year's with them, and just be with her. And that's something that I was missing for so long, right? And so that aspect, I think, of my life is fulfilled at the moment. I think it could be a little bit better because now, you know, I do my own thing. Everyone does their own thing, and we're still not so close, but we are closer at least than when I was in Wisconsin. And so now I also started a family as well. I have a little girl that's almost 3 years old. Her name is Leilani. Hopefully I'm getting married next year as well with the person that helped me fund the coffee shop, my girlfriend, Yanni. And we have also a small Chihuahua named Cookie Smalls. And so, yeah, I think that aspect of my life is really good right now. Thank God. And I hope that it can just continue to be that way.
Oh, and like you mentioned, something that I was missing for so long, that you were working, you were studying, you were doing everything right, but there was still something missing. And family has been able to be there now for you.
Exactly. And of course, family is a big thing. It's important to have your family close to you because a lot of times, a lot of the love that you receive is from your family. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have your family with you, then like how can you receive love? You can still receive love from your friends because I felt that when I was in Wisconsin or from close acquaintances, but it's not the same, right? It's not the same to have the love of your mother, of your father, your brother, your sister, and also share that love back. Yeah. And that's something that I can do now. Like, for example, right now, my little brother, he's with us. He gets a chance to learn about what I've gone through. He gets a chance to learn about what other people have gone through in similar situations. And so this can help him in some sort of way. It's all part of family at the end. So, yeah.
So you mentioned also thinking about others who might be in similar situations. So as we think about people and individuals growing up in the U.S. as undocumented or as DACA beneficiaries, what words of advice would you have for them? Or what would you like to share with them?
I would share that, you know, for the people, especially people that I can relate more to, which is people around my age group, right? But even people younger than me, is to basically try to use the time that you have in the U.S. in a positive manner. So try to use it wisely. Use it for good, for bettering yourself, your families. Because if you decide to waste this opportunity that you have of being in a country, not your country, but being in another country where you can accomplish many things, and you throw it all away by doing things that you shouldn't be doing, by getting in trouble, by doing things that are, stupid things, all of that, it's not going to get you anywhere. And so try to use that time wisely, save up some money. You never know if you might have to come back one day to Mexico. And the last thing you want to do is find yourself with not having enough money to provide for yourself and maybe also for your family, because maybe you're a person that sends money to your family and they have been accustomed to you sending them money. But if then all of a sudden you have to come back to Mexico and you were the only source of income for your family, well, what's going to happen then, right? So just be prepared for anything, but overall, just try to use that time there good. And also, don't forget about your families in Mexico. Try to connect with them. Sometimes many years have gone by since you last saw them. And so you have drifted away from them and they from you. But try to just stay close to them because it's important to be close to your family, right?
Yes.
That's what I think I would share with my fellow people that are back in the States.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we kind of already started talking about resources. We talked about the need for more open conversations about immigration, different immigration status. Are there other resources that you think would be helpful to think about supporting immigrant, undocumented students, families, and communities?
Well, just by kind of looking through my own story that I was sharing earlier, I think that at the time that I was going through this situation where trying to decide, should I go back? Should I not go back? I didn't have a place where I could go to and have this open conversation. And so if there would have been something like that in the past, some sort of group or some sort of network or something that could have helped me make this decision and not feel guilty about it, I think that would have meant more than money. And so I think that's still, I'm not sure how it is right now in Madison, if there's still, I mean, of course, I remember organizations like Catholic Multicultural Center, or I remember Centro Hispano being there as an organization that, that looks out after immigrants, but it's missing. I don't feel like it's there, right? I mean, they are there to help out, but I don't think that this exactly that what I needed was there. And so I just feel like something like that, I don't know if that would be a group or what exactly that would mean, right? But it would mean that you would have a support group to help you and to guide you through these decisions. And of course, also be free, right? Because I could have also went to a lawyer, but I don't know if a lawyer was what I needed at the moment. I feel like what I needed was something more like a conversation between two ordinary people giving advice that's coming from like a moral perspective and not the perspective of a lawyer. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, is the moral one, but for me, the other thing that comes up is somebody who understands the lived experience too. So you have two huge decisions to make. And similarly, I had to come to the same terms when I was growing up and saying, do I do A or B? And so much weight that goes into it, because whichever pathway you choose, you're going to follow it at that point. And I think for me, it was also that notion of, do people understand
exactly
that
someone that you can relate to?
Yeah,
exactly. And that's what I didn't have at the moment. Someone that I could relate to, that was not going through the same situation, but that could empathize with my cause. And that wasn't there. So I just feel like that needs to be addressed somehow, because that is going to mean the world to many people. I don't think I'm the only one that has gone through this before. I think there's many people that are in similar places, in similar situations. And so we need to have, I don't know if it would be a place. I just can't.
Well, what's coming to mind is we had Erika Rosales talk about the Center for Dreamers. And so the whole purpose was exactly what you mentioned, that we have a location where we have people being able to get immigration resources. So thinking about applications, the social emotional, thinking about all the different conversations and well-being for others, the educational part of it with what are the different pathways, and then also just being there. And I feel like that center, I think was episode 4 or 5, that we had Erika talk about that, but how we need more of those locations or more of those groups that are going to be there for everyone too.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good start, and that can be essentially be the start of something great, right? And so, yeah, definitely, hopefully you guys can continue doing that, and hopefully that has great results. But other than that, I think the other resources that could be helpful just in general for immigrants and undocumented students, in terms of laws, right? In terms of laws, which would be, for example, a law that could help undocumented students that wish to continue studying, a law that can help them with like educational expenses or some sort of finance. Like, for example, if you are a citizen of the U.S., then you qualify for a lot of help from the government for continuing your education. But if you are undocumented, you really don't have that other than special scholarships or special organizations that might be willing to give you a scholarship or some assistance. But I just feel like that needs to be a little bit more generalized so that not only the most brightest student can get that help, but a lot of people in general, because that overall is going to help the immigrant community.
Yes.
By having more graduates in different fields that can then return that help to the community. And I still feel like that at the time when I left Madison, I felt like that wasn't there yet. Of course, there was a lot of help in terms of like, here's $1,000 for this. But not everyone is as lucky as me in terms of getting a scholarship that pays full tuition for all of your studies. And I, of course, was very lucky that I got a scholarship like that. I just think it should just be generalized, right? Yeah. Where more people are helped. Because if you think about it, the citizens that are born there, they don't have to be extra special to get help from the government. They just have to want it. And I think that should also apply to undocumented students, to the general.
And you mentioned the policies, the practices, so comprehensive immigration reform.
Exactly.
At the national level, at the state level, thinking about in-state tuition support or other ways.
Driver's licenses for the general population. I mean, I hear that states like, I think California and
Illinois also has
exactly. Like, why can't Wisconsin also be a state that shows how much they appreciate their immigrants by not blocking us, but by giving us the support or the tools and the resources that we need, which could be something as, I don't want to say as small, because getting a driver's license is a big thing, but yeah, they can start, by looking into that, by looking at other ways to make our lives easier.
Yeah. No, well, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you sharing your story and kind of talking about all the decision processes that you had to make in terms of moving from Mexico to the U.S., as well as thinking about the importance of family, starting your own business, the passion for coffee. And I just appreciate you sharing your story with us today. Thank you so much for that.
No, Lalo, al contrario, like the opposite. I should thank you for this opportunity to share my story with others, and really appreciate you. Really appreciate that you're taking your time to put these podcasts together. As I imagine, it's not easy putting all the back pieces together, but really appreciate that, and really appreciate this time that you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Well, listeners, thank you so much. I hope you really enjoyed listening to this story and also getting more resources about what's needed in our communities to support undocumented immigrant and DACA beneficiaries in our communities. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Same. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Educators and Immigration Podcast. You can find out more information about us at www.educatorsand'immigration.com. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with your family, friends, and colleagues. You could also leave us a review and rate us on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.